Hello everyone, happy Saturday. It is the 3rd of August and it's time to talk about the books I read in July. Starting with a book that I thought came out last year because it had so much hype last year, but I had a look and it was actually published 2020. Let me put these down. And that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which was a really fun, quirky story about a man called Linus Baker who works for the department in charge of magical youth. And he's basically an orphanage inspector, so he goes to the different orphanages, inspects them and writes reports, and then makes recommendations whether they should remain open or close, and just about how they're running. And he gets given this special assignment to go to this house, which has the most dangerous kids at it, basically the ones with the most magic. And so a lot of people are scared to go there. They're very, very hidden away. He didn't even know this orphanage existed. And then he goes and obviously he falls in love with them. And it was quite heartwarming at times. I don't think it's one that's going to stick with me. It was a classic. It was a classic 3.75 for me, like most of my reads are, but that's fine. It almost read like a children's story. I did Google it and it is considered an adult's book, but it almost felt like it was an adult's book written as a children's book, if that makes sense. It definitely had childlike elements to it, but it was fun, it was enjoyable, but it wasn't anything special for me. So that was the first book that I read in July. And next I read a book that I was pretty excited about, and then when I tried to think of it the other day to gather my thoughts, I couldn't remember a single thing about it, and that is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I got this really recently. Yeah, I was just really intrigued by it. Luckily I did make some notes on it and have some thoughts ready because I could literally remember nothing about this story, but basically we're following this woman called Young Hai, who is, oh also I should say who this was translated by, Deborah Smith. Credits to Deborah Smith for the English translation from Korean. But we're following Young Hai, who randomly decides one day to become vegetarian, and the only explanation she can give is, I had a dream. And everyone's like, but why? And she's like, I had a dream. And she's like, why can't you understand that that's a good enough reason to turn vegetarian? And everyone in her family is very much not happy about it, particularly her husband. So the story's split into 3 parts, told by different people in her life. The first part is from the perspective of her husband, and he's just fuming that she's decided to go veggie and he can't wrap his head around it whatsoever. I found it really funny because it was ironic. If it had been written by a man, I would have been horrified by the things he was saying, but because it's written by a woman, it just, the humour was there. It just felt, the humour felt right, if you know what I mean. Yeah, the first part from her husband's point of view was definitely my favourite part of the 3, but on the whole, I'm pretty sure I enjoyed this, but like I said, I don't remember a lot about it. I've gone with a pretty average 3.75. I think I'll keep hold of it, but it's definitely not one that I'm, like, if someone says to me, oh, what was that about, I'll be like, oh. And next I read The Psychopath by Mary Turner Thompson, which I used as my July TBR jar prompt, which was a memoir, biography or autobiography. So this is a memoir written about Mary Turner Thompson's experience of discovering her husband was a bigamist, sex offender and con man. So basically a terrible person. I didn't know what a bigamist was going into this, but it's a person who is married to several people, which is illegal in the UK and quite a lot of other places, I think. So yeah, she's got this husband, they've got 2 kids, and she thinks she's got this lovely man, and then it turns out that she's not his first wife, and he's married to someone else right now. And basically the story unfolds, he has so many different children with different women, but he tells them all that he's infertile, so then it's a miracle when they get pregnant. and he's just a horrible person. But, well, basically, he is a psychopath. So she's written, this is her second book. The first one she wrote was called The Bigamist, and then I believe since then she's done some research into what a psychopath actually is and discovered that this man is definitely one. And he's just going around wrecking people's lives, basically. And because now she's kind of created a following for herself, people are getting in touch with her all the time saying, oh, this has happened to me. This man who you've been talking about, Will Jordan, has destroyed my life too. And like, they're sharing her stories with them. This was actually one of the lowest rated books on my TBR according to Storygraph. It used to be the lowest. It was now sitting at the second lowest, I believe, at 3 stars. Used to be 3.03, so it has gone down ever so slightly. And at first I didn't agree with the negative reviews I've seen of it. A lot of reviews saying that it just felt like she was trying to plug her first book. As I read more and more, I could see why people thought that. And it did become quite repetitive, and it was like, oh, in The Bigamist, in my other book, in my first book, in The Bigamist. Like, she mentioned it at least once a chapter, I believe, that she'd written another book. And I get it, because that's a big part of her life and that's a big part of this story, but it did seem to come up possibly more than was necessary, and I can completely understand why people would think that it was just a plug. I gave this 3.25 stars. It was really interesting to read out. Obviously a really, 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 really horrible experience. Hopefully one that I will never experience first or second or third or whatever hand. So it's nice to, not nice, but it's interesting to read about it so indirectly. I would never want to experience this, or anyone I know to experience it, but I find it interesting to read about it happening to other people. Does that make me a bad person? I don't think so. Oh well. And then I read Coraline, which I borrowed and have since returned, so I don't have a copy of it. But Coraline I did not read as a child. It is a children's horror book. I didn't read it. I don't think I knew it was a book for a long time. I believe I watched the film when I was younger. I'm sure that I did. I remember being pretty freaked out by it, and I can see why. The copy I had illustrations at the start of every chapter to depict a scene from that chapter, and they are spooky. I started it in an evening when I was home alone, and I was in bed like, ugh. And then I finished it the following morning, and I felt way calmer about it. So it could have been a situational thing, but yeah, it was a pretty fun read. But I would definitely be traumatized if I read that as a child. But I'm not good with scary stuff, so you know, a good read though. And I liked that Neil Gaiman, the author, was saying that he wrote this for his daughters to try and teach them that when something's scary, it's okay to be scared, but you should also be brave. And I do think that's a really lovely message. And I gave this 3.75 stars. Classic. And then one evening while I was washing up, I decided to listen to a really, really short audiobook, a Welsh audiobook called Gangsters in a Glow by Peggy Talverin. And I can't, off the top of my head, remember who narrated it, so I do apologise for that. But this is a Welsh learner's book, and it was just so nice to hear the language again after a long time. It made me feel really warm and fuzzy inside. I didn't follow the whole thing, but I was able to pick up words and phrases throughout, and it inspired me to pick up the physical copy. So I had a look online and I found a website of a publisher who publishes loads of different Welsh books and Welsh learner books, and that publisher is called Atebol. So I scooped up 6 on there, 6 learner books, and Gangsters in a Glow was one of them, which translates to Gangsters in the Rain, by the way. So yeah, it's a silly story. It's like a kid's story, but I don't mind because Welsh is very special to me and I want to keep up with it. I gave this a 3.5 stars. It was pretty middle of the road. Like, when I can't understand all of it, I can't really give a completely true rating, I feel, but that's what I went with. Next I read Wildfire by Hannah Grace, which is the sequel to Icebreaker. I believe there's 3 and maybe even a 4th one coming out now. I really loved Icebreaker when I read it last year. I gave it 4.75 stars. I thought it was a great book. I did not have the same feelings towards this one. I don't know if my tastes have just changed or if it was completely different, I don't know, but there was a lot that I didn't love about this book. I had a lot of laugh out loud moments throughout it, so that was nice. Like I was enjoying it, but it was the sex scene. So it starts off with a big sex scene because basically we're following Russ and Aurora, who meet on they think it's a one night stand. They're never going to see each other again, or if they do, they're just going to pretend it never happened. But then it turns out they're both working at the same summer camp together, so they have to spend however many weeks in a pretty confined space together. So it's forced proximity trope, I guess. But yeah, because it starts with that big sex scene, but then nothing else sexual happens until like past beyond page 200. So it kind of felt slow burn in a way, which doesn't really make any sense, but that's just how it felt to me. Not for me. But again, I gave this 3.75. That's about all I have to say. I'm not sure if I'll pick up the next one. I don't remember anything about Henry really, but I remember when I read Icebreaker thinking I would like the next book to be about Henry, I'm pretty sure. So maybe I'll enjoy that one. I'm not sure, but we'll see. Then it was my poll winner for the month of July, which was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, which I wasn't really excited about when it came up and then won the poll. I was like, I'm not sure I'm into this right now. But a couple of days before I started it, someone I follow on Instagram had posted a really good review of it, saying they really enjoyed it. I want to say it was what Vicky read next. I believe it was her. So that got me a bit excited to read it, and I really loved this book. Eleanor is such a character. She just made me giggle the whole way through. Not the whole way through, because she also made me very nearly cry. I felt so sad for her. The people in her life, especially the people in her life at the start of the book, are just horrible. And she's been through so much. You just feel so sad for her. And she just tries to keep going. She's really trying. People don't get her. People just don't get her, and people are not nice to her. I did roll my eyes at her a couple of times. Like sometimes the character felt a little bit too extreme, but then that might genuinely be some people's internal monologue. But like, who am I to say what other people's inner thoughts are like? But people would think mine are crazy, so I can't judge anyone else's. I think if I hadn't been eating my lunch, which was a very large lunch that I was struggling to fit in, while reading the sad part of this book, then I would have cried. Like, there were tears in my eyes, but because I was so full, the tears didn't come. But it was so close, and I just felt so sad for her. There are severe trigger warnings with this book. I feel that it's hard to say them without spoiling it, but if you have specific triggers, then I would definitely check if they're in this book before you pick it up, because it was heavy, but it was just so good too. Just so emotional, and yeah, I just loved it. I gave this 4.5 stars. The ending as well was not what I was expecting. I had my theories, but they were not correct. Yeah, just a really great book. So thank you, people of Instagram. Probably about 3 people who voted for this book. Really enjoyed it. And finally, I read Solitaire by Alice Oseman, who I have said in the past is my favourite author. I think that probably still remains true. There aren't many authors who I've read a lot of their work. This is the 4th novel I've read by Alice Oseman, and I've also read Heartstoppers Volume 1 to 4. This was definitely my least favourite. This sat at 3.5 for me, where her other books have all been 4+, I think. It just wasn't the same, but this is her debut. She was 19 when she wrote this, so maybe that's why, I don't know. Yeah, it just wasn't the same. I think Tori in some ways would have been quite relatable for me as a 6th former. So she's 17, depressed. She thinks she's a piece of shit, and like, I think as a teenager I could have found comfort in reading a character who felt some of the same ways that I did. I'm not saying it was a complete connection, but there were elements of Tori that I could see my younger self in. But the storyline was a bit wishy-washy for me. Like, it was a bit something or nothing. It was kind of bizarre. But the thing I love about Alice Oseman writing is it's just so easy to read, and she does just get what teenagers are like. Although interestingly, this is the one she wrote while she was a teenager, and I would say it was the least relatable for me out of all of her books, but I don't know. So this obviously was written before The Heartstoppers, but it takes place in the timeline of volume 4, I think it is. So it was interesting to read it from a different perspective, but the same kind of timeline of what was going on. Trigger warnings for depression, suicidal thoughts, eating disorder, and a couple of other ones, less severe. Yeah, I don't know where I sit on this one. Oh, by the way, so we're following Tori Spring, who is Charlie Spring's brother from Heartstopper. I feel like that was important to mention. There's a lot of weird stuff going on at school, basically. And that's all there is to say. So with all that said, thank you so much for coming to watch my July wrap up, and I hope you have a great August.